Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. I have with me John Thurman. He is a published author. He is a retired Army chaplain. He is he's so many things. He's a master's level therapist, ordained minister, and he works with folks in all aspects of life. And so today, what I wanted to do is pick his brain and get a little insight on what is going on as people reintegrate, as people open back up, as the world opens back up. And so I have a few questions for John. And so, hey, John, so tell me what you've been working on lately.
Hey, well, first of all, really happy to be with you today, Pastor, and this is really great. You know, we've got a little bit of history together. I've been back in private practice now for about 8 months, and a majority of it has been dealing with people, couples and individuals who are struggling with a lot of anxiety, sometimes some marital issues over all this crazy stuff with COVID. And I think we're beginning to see the curtain lift just a little bit.
Well, that's encouraging, right?
It really is. It really is. And in that, people are getting out a little bit more, but also I'm getting more phone calls and more requests about, hey, what do I do with this? How do I deal with that? And since I'm a therapist that mainly works with Christians, these are folks of faith. And I think they've been surprised with how much fear and anxiety and really feeling kind of discombobulated since we've not been able to really be together in a corporate body for worship and fellowship, since we've not been able to do small groups and things like that. And so it's been kind of surprising. A lot of married couples dealing with a lot of being together, almost too much issues.
Too much.
Too much, yes. My wife and I are coming up on 49 years, and we haven't killed each other yet during COVID.
There's still time. No.
Yeah, there's still time.
No. So I mean, and that's one of the things, unlike, because you did disaster response.
Yes.
So I mean, you've seen horrible disasters,
Yes.
and you've helped people get through that. How is what we've seen over the last year different than a natural disaster or a mass shooting or whatever?
Well, with a natural disaster, and I respond to a bunch of them, there's a beginning and an end. And typically, when disaster mental health and first responders show up, the event is just ended or it's just ending. And once we finish the recovery with the process where we're looking to make sure everybody's safe, then we go into recovery mode. And so the danger is pretty much past at that point in time. And a shooting, as bad as it is, and I responded to one just a few weeks ago, and when these last 3 have happened, it reminded me of a couple of years ago when I was down in El Paso responding to that. But what we know is that the event is over. Now we have to deal with the aftermath. The thing with COVID is it's not over yet. And it started off so mysteriously, it didn't really have a clear start date, except when we were told not to go to work anymore.
Yeah.
And because the news was so ambivalent and so much was unknown about it, apart from its origin and how it evolved and things like that, there was just, when people don't know the cause of something or they don't know a course of action, you get anxious, you get worried.
So it almost seems like you had, kind of a slow build, unlike one of these natural disasters where, it happens and it's over. You had a slow build, a lot of unknowns which added to it, and then really frenzy that kind of went from high to ultra high to high to ultra. I mean, it just kind of hovered.
Yeah, to crazy.
To full-blown crazy.
To having people do this if your mask is not over your nose and stuff. And the whole process, unfortunately, became highly politicized. And it's still a real hot potato.
Yes.
And still very divisive. The good news is we are seeing the curtain slowly lift. My wife and I were out for a walk the other day, and we ran into 2 neighbors. And oh my gosh, we had conversations. We actually talked and realized it had been a year apart from just going on the sidewalk. And so I think as the curtain lifts, there'll be a lot of stuff to untangle because a lot of couples have been kind of forced to be in close proximity to each other. Moms who were looking forward to sending their kids off to school and go get with their girlfriends for maybe Bible study or coffee or whatever, didn't.
Yeah, or just a minute by themselves.
Yeah, and then guys, who are used to going to work, we're in the house hunkered down.
Yeah.
And, we're not designed to be that way. God hardwired us to be relational and to be involved.
And so what you're seeing is a lot of what I'm seeing too. Is on the pastoral side, a lot of disconnected people.
Oh yeah, a lot of disconnections. Disconnected from themselves, disconnected from their routines, disconnected from their fellow workers or co-workers,
Yeah.
and disconnected from people that they normally interact with. It saddens me to see in TV, here's a reporter who's seeing his grandma and his mom for the first time in a year, physically.
Yes.
And so that whole idea of kind of coming out of the house again, coming out from behind the doors to re-engage in life, and to realize that it's not as easy as we thought it was after a year of basically being locked up.
Yeah. So you're seeing this, that folks are super disconnected.
Yes.
What is that? What kind of problems is that causing?
Well, I think we're disconnected on several levels. We're disconnected spiritually because even though we may have maintained our own private time and spiritual disciplines at home and with our family, being part of a corporate body, a body bound together by worship and a common set of values and scripture and all, that's been a big thing. I know for us, because I'm an older dude and I've got asthma and I've got other stuff going on, I basically didn't show up in a worship service for about a year.
Yeah.
And it was kind of odd coming back in, everybody was spaced out. It was good. It was good to be back in the house of the Lord. So spiritually reconnected, socially reconnected. Once again, getting back into a rhythm of being together. It was so nice. We slipped over to Texas earlier this year, and around Christmas time, it was so weird being in a restaurant inside. And I remember I heard order up, and I'm like, what does order up mean? Remember that?
Oh, is that my takeout's ready?
Yeah. And we were actually sitting down eating, spread out. But I'm like, oh my gosh. And it was amazing to me. It had been so long since I'd done it. It was kind of freaky. And so, a lot of us have kind of disconnected from what our role was a year ago.
Like kind of the structures that we had in our lives.
Like get up and go to work, or get up and go do this, get up and go do that. And now it's get up and try to find a quiet space in your home, do some work while you're getting sure your kids are getting an education, while in the meantime you and your spouse are trying not to kill each other.
Yeah.
And just the whole rhythm of life has been broken up because there's not been a time, maybe the early 1900s when the Spanish flu hit so many people, have we seen such a lockdown of people.
Yeah, and just like, I've just seen it, right? People are disconnected, and they're not just disconnected from other people, they're disconnected from these structures and routines and rhythms, but they're also disconnected from structures that keep them socially connected and anchored.
Yeah. We're beginning to see people get together for coffee, for lunch and things like that. But if you look at it, it has been over a year. And it'll be interesting to see in the next 6 months as people begin to move back into this new routine, what that'll look like as far as feeling connected. I know from a lot of my pastor friends throughout the state and the country, the surprising thing, which to me was really good to hear, is most of them have continued to march on as far as their financial base. Mm-hmm. And they found many creative ways to stay in touch with their community and to try to keep the congregation informed. And I've seen for a lot of pastors who are more of the introverted side, they've been able to reach out more. A lot of guys who maybe haven't been real comfortable with Zoom or other social media have become experts in that and finding ways to extend that touch out to encourage people. On the other hand, we find a lot of people are having to relearn how to have conversations with someone other than their children and their spouse.
Yeah, well, and a Zoom conversation is different.
It is. It really is.
Especially if you have more than 2 people on there.
Yes, and I've been on some where we had 50, and you're like,
it's
I'm
an
just
audience.
Take my camera off.
Yeah, it's an audience. I mean, and that's
is.
because you can't, if there were 3 or 4 of us here talking, somebody could be talking and you and I could crack a little joke. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
oh, that's, and we could have, but on Zoom, it just get everything. There's no, the nuance is lost. And so
you lose so much nuance. You just hope everybody has their pants on.
Oh, very much so. Very much
but
so.
But and Zoom is great, but once again, we're in that single dimensional element.
One person can talk.
Right.
One person can respond.
Wait for your little box to light up.
Wait for your box to light up. There's no little things on the side.
Right. And you really, when you're communicating, you're not just watching this. You're watching everything.
Yeah.
And in the little 1-inch square box, you can't really do that. And Zoom is better than nothing.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, we thank God for all the technology that's
Yes,
allowed
yes.
us to do this. So what does reattaching look like? Like reattaching to some of these structures, right? We've been disconnected.
Yep.
At some point, you got to reattach, right? And whether that's now or whether that's in the summer, like whenever, at some point you need to reattach. What does it look like?
Great movie years ago. What about Bob? And the answer was baby steps. And I think each person has to look at their own situation and look at the risks that they're willing to take. And risk just being, I've been in this rut or this pattern for over a year. What's it going to be like to adjust that pattern? What's it going to be like to maybe shift a little bit? And to start really with baby steps, like going back to worship. That's been really fun. I'm so happy Easter's here this weekend. And being intentional about it, but also keeping your expectations low.
So give me an example. What do you mean?
Well,
give me examples.
Like if when you come into church, some people may be in a hug and embracing mode. Many won't. And if you come towards someone like this, they'll probably be like,
"Oh yeah," or
"Get away from me."
Yeah, no, for sure. I always feel like I'm doing slow motion karate because I don't know if it's a handshake or an elbow bump.
Come in like this, you go, "Okay, I can."
Yeah. It's like So,
and I think,
I want to be. I mean, and everybody's doing that because they want to be respectful. Yeah, absolutely.
And you're right. I was the other day. I wasn't sure how this guy wanted to greet me, so I'm like you. I'm moving into position with the hand, but I could also fold into the fist bump or the elbow, and he grabbed it firmly. He said, "Do you have some hand sanitizer?" I said, "Yeah, right here."
Yeah.
So we gave a good handshake, squirt, wipe, and then off we went.
Perfect.
But yeah, those little nuances and
so baby steps.
Yeah, baby steps, and giving yourself and others some room to kind of reacclimate.
So making sure that there's some space.
Yes.
Because it may make something well up inside of you.
It could. And
have you seen that with people that you're talking to?
Yeah, I have. I've seen some people when they actually begin to kind of unpack some of this stuff, they're surprised at how much emotion is there. I've had men and women both say, because they'll ask me, they said, "Now, are you doing live or virtual?" I said, "We can go either way. In my office, we're about 7 feet apart."
Gotcha.
And you know what? 90% of them go, "I want to be with a live person."
Okay.
And as we're talking, sometimes, even I had a gal the other day, right in the mid-conversation, said, "I work in a retail store, and we're masked, and we kind of maintain the distancing." She said, "Apart from my family, you're the first person I've sat down with to have a private conversation where I'm not wearing a mask." We always give the clients the option.
Yeah.
And she says, "Why am I crying?" I said, "Maybe this is fresh." She said, "It's been about a year since I've talked with someone other than my family."
Sure.
And I think a lot of that is what a lot of us feel. And even I've had big old guys just kind of like, "I don't know why I'm getting so emotional." I said, "Well, I don't either, but kind of nice to be out of the mask and nice to be able to sit down and talk."
Yeah. And again, we're not talking about being reckless. You've had your vaccination.
Yes.
Yeah. To reattach.
The scripture says that we're to be kind and tenderhearted towards one another. And I believe that means respecting boundaries, respecting where people are.
Yeah.
I have a friend of mine that is almost a germaphobe, and greetings to him is like this.
Yes. Very much. Yeah, and that's okay, yeah.
And that's completely legit. So baby steps and just easing back in, but also being aware of kind of where maybe you feel a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, and what happens if you feel that uncomfort while you're trying to get reattached to
You just keep walking.
Okay.
The biggest thing about fear, so many people want to cower from fear or avoid fear. The way you deal with fear is to stare it down and call it what it is and go right towards it.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, really. It really is.
That goes a little counterintuitive to kind of what
yeah.
some people may think.
Well, if you think about it, though, lions are lazy. They look cool. They got the hair, they're kind of laying around, And when it comes time to eat, the pride, that is the ladies,
Yes.
they're out kind of hanging out. And when the lion says roar, the gazelles go, lions and tigers and bears, oh my.
Yeah.
And they run opposite the roar into the pride.
There you go.
And, the scripture says that Satan goes about like a roaring lion, but he also is an accusing whisperer. And I think the way we deal with that is we just lean right into it.
Yeah.
You know, when you go towards the fear, although it's so counterintuitive, God meets us at that point. He infuses us with His Spirit and gives us courage. And so many people say, well, I just need to wait on the Lord. I need to wait on the Lord. Well, if the Lord tells you to wait on the Lord, yes. But if you're using that as an excuse for inactivity, shame on you.
Wow. Okay. So you say, okay, it's time for me to re-engage, right? I'm taking my precaution. I'm not being reckless,
Right.
but I may be a little scared, a little nervous. I'm going to walk towards the thing. What happens if the thing that you attach to, right? Whether it's maybe your work situation, like, you used to be really attached to all the folks at work and now everybody's virtual, right? Or you used to be attached to a certain friend group or a certain organization, and that thing no longer exists in the same way.
Yeah.
What can you do?
Well, for 5.5 years, I worked as a contractor for Magellan with the Federal Occupational Health.
Oh, okay.
That was where I did a lot of my disaster response work. Had worked the team that I worked with for about 5 or 6 years. I was really connected with the special ops guys and the federal law enforcement, the marshal services, the Forest Service, and was with those guys every week. And when COVID came along, it became all Zoom. And then in late May, I found out that my position was going away. There were 8 of us that were laid off.
Wow.
And so not only did I lose my connection, that job went away, and those 5.5 years of relationships. And so I had to go self. We could have a pity party.
Yeah.
But that just burns up time and energy.
Sure.
And so it took a month.
They're not those parties are not fun parties.
Those are not fun parties. People tend to wear a lot of gray,
Yeah.
and black, and dark brown. And we prayed about it. I got a good severance package, so we took a month and just didn't do anything, just kind of thought, and went back into private practice. It's the smartest decision I made. But even the grief from being tied in with that group of people over the years, because there were about 4 or 5 of us that were national responders. When stuff happened, they would say, hey, can y'all be there in 3 or 4 days? And,
Sure.
And that's gone away. And, for a lot of you, you've maybe have lost your job, you've lost your workplace, you've lost your network. I'm sorry you lost it. You need to grieve it. You need to see it for what it was. You need to celebrate what it was. But you don't need to get hung up in it. You don't need to be tied down by it. You really go, that was a great chapter in my life. Years ago, I went to a speaking course, and Florence Littauer, who was a champion of women speakers and writers in the Christian community, she really kind of had her heyday in the 70s and 80s. And a friend of mine wanted me to go to her training. I went, sure, since you're paying for it. I'd done some stuff for her family. And I had nothing but respect for Florence. I'd known her and was on her board later. And they said, here's your speech. You got to give a 2-minute speech. And I thought, okay. And they gave you 5 minutes to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots going on in the past 12, 13 months. And there's been a lot of sadness for people, a lot of loss, a lot of change. And in New Mexico, you have to have a rear view mirror and a side view mirror. And those are...
You don't have to have blinkers, though.
You don't have to, apparently not.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to have taillights.
That's fair.
But that rear view mirror and that side view mirror are to keep you spatially aware of what's going on. The rear view mirror is to help you see what may be coming up behind you, but also where you've come from. And the side view mirror or mirrors keep you situationally aware. If we aren't careful, in our culture today, we tend to spend too much time looking in the rear view mirror. And if you and I are driving, particularly in Albuquerque, and we spend too much time in the rear view mirror, we're going to have a wreck.
Yeah.
And so you look back, you identify what was lost, you grieve over it appropriately, and then you turn the page and go, okay, Lord, new chapters coming, new routines, new relationships, maybe new work.
Yeah.
And so you find some ways to get back into those structures or find new structures.
So does fear keep people from finding new structures to attach to?
Yeah. Did you have a 7th grade dance?
Oh, yeah.
If you remember the 7th grade dance, all the boys were here, all the girls were here, except for the early bloomers.
Oh, yeah.
And the boys pretty much grazed the food, and the girls kind of danced together. Because boys not going to dance together. What a difference a year made when the 8th grade dance occurred.
All the boyfriends and girlfriends were dancing.
Right, and they aren't just dancing, they're doing what we used to call the Rick Rock. They just kind of drooped over each other. Not really dancing, just kind of.
Yeah. Well, the boys still didn't know how to dance.
They didn't know how to dance, and they still had the food.
Yeah.
But at least they went home smelling perfume on their shirt for the first time.
Yeah.
And so, that was, 7th grade was kind of awkward. She was like, I'm not going to dance with any yucky girls. And the girls are like, 7th grade boys either don't have enough deodorant or they're wearing too much of that Axe stuff, and it's about to choke me out. And so we got to embrace change. You can never step in a river in the same place twice because water's moving. And I think as we grow in our faith, your faith should take you to a different place today than it was last week.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's familiar and sometimes it's unknown.
So, okay, so how do you, so if you said, I'm going to take some baby steps, right? I'm going to reattach, I'm going to do these things. But I don't want to do it right. I mean, I'm going to take the proper, precautions. I'm going to face it. I'm going to call it out. I'm going to take that step. How do you know if people are safe? How do you know, how do you begin that? How much do I share with them? Maybe in that other place you were, you can't. It's been so long you can't even remember how you started.
Right.
So how do you restart?
That's a good question. If you're in the context of a new group,
Yeah.
I think you always do incremental disclosure. When I was in seminary, I worked for Dr. Frankie Rainey for a semester. I was his bag dragger. He was the pastor of our church, and the first month we were there, I didn't even figure he was the pastor. He was such a kind guy and really smart. Ends up, he had a PhD in New Testament Greek.
There you go.
Preached out of the Nestle text.
Yeah.
Kind of new stuff. And I remember I said, well, Frankie, how do you handle yourself as a pastor? He said, well, people really want to know you, and sometimes they don't really want to know you. They want to know what's going on. He said, so tell them something that's not going to hurt you, and see if you hear anything in 4 or 5 weeks. If Sister Smith calls and says, well, Brother Thurman, I'm praying for that issue, you'll know someone leaked it. It's a little bit different in a small group. I think what you do, because I've led a bunch of small groups, I was a small group director for a large church here in town, you share incrementally. You share something with them, and then you see what the response is. And you and I both know people who come to a group, and they're like, what? And
Man.
You're like, oh, no.
Yeah, not on the first 1 minute, please.
Right, please. I don't want to know your life history. Just say, I struggle, blah, blah, blah. Don't give me the whole breakdown.
Yeah.
And I think, once again, it's an incremental process.
But we also know the people that come to the group and play it close to the vest. 5 years later,
They're still playing it close to the
yeah, you don't even know, you've never heard their middle name, or you've
And
never.
I think that, in the context of a small group, part of a group leader's responsibility is to prayerfully look for ways to draw that person out. Now, one of the things that I used to do when I was doing group training is get a ball of string. Mm-hmm. Every time someone talks, the string gets held. And you're holding on to your string, and after about 10 minutes, you can see, you got a very visual representation of who's engaged and who isn't.
Oh, wow.
And everybody holds on to it to the end of the exercise. We go, okay, look around. And you'll typically see in a group of 7 or 8, 3 or 4 kind of dominating it.
Yeah.
2 were maybe touched it once, and there's usually 1 or 2 that are kind of like, oh, no, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't need it.
I'm holding my invisible string as it is.
Yeah.
And so part of that is not pushing people, but trying to pull them, trying to draw that out of them. And men and women are so different about that. Women, when they have as I understand them, because if you and I ever figure them out, we'll be rich, we'll be on Dobson, and then we'll be dead because some feminazi had us killed because we figured it out.
Oh, man.
Then our wives would get together and write another book, and our kids' kids would be set.
Exactly.
But women seem to kind of have this, as I understand them, this intuitive sense of trust where they know who they can kind of share information with. Guys usually don't do that in a group. We'll usually disclose when we're doing something completely different. Maybe at the range shooting pistols or rifles, maybe working on a car.
Yeah.
I'm a photographer, so maybe a couple of us out, and while we're shooting, some guy may say, hey, I lost my mom last year, blah, blah. And so.
Golf course, things like that.
Yeah, golf course. We'll tend to share stuff with guys that we trust if we're doing something else.
Yeah.
It's not like, well, let's talk about the death of your parents.
Yeah, no.
And we're like, I think I have an appointment to get a root canal in an hour.
At least just a voluntary one, yeah.
And so part of that is just being kind of open to where people are and letting them be who they are.
Good. Okay, so taking that first step. So what if you've gone through a huge trauma? from reattaching, from re-engaging?
It can, and let me differentiate a little bit. There's PTS and PTSD.
Sure. And I don't know the difference.
And PTS is how your brain normally responds to a traumatic situation.
Okay.
The sudden, unexpected death of a loved one, any type of traumatic event. And your brain is kind of like, oh my gosh, I don't have a file folder for this. And so it can take it months to kind of sort that out. After 9/11 occurred, George Bonanno, who's a very respected grief and trauma expert at Columbia, sent a team into Manhattan to see how many people had PTS. They went in there and they discovered that 96% of the population that was still there, 96% had PTS. And they said, okay, which is post-traumatic stress, which is different than post-traumatic stress disorder. All the mental health people are going, oh, there are going to be millions of people impacted by PTSD. They'll be just crushed. Well, what we had learned earlier from the Mir bombing, I was involved with some debriefing on that, the Oklahoma City bombing, is that the American Red Cross raised millions of dollars for counseling. And 3 years later, it hadn't been touched. Bonanno's team came back 10 years later to sample pretty much the same demographic. And what they found out, and this is amazing, yet it's pretty constant, only 8 to 17% of the survivors ever develop PTSD.
And so what's
disorder.
What is disorder like?
I'll go to that in a minute. PTSD, where they had intrusive thoughts, they couldn't work, they had overwhelming, just a whole host of things. The DSM-5, which is our Bible for mental health stuff, goes through about 9 possibilities. But the biggest one are intrusive thoughts, the inability to work, the inability to function, and not just the inability, but being overwhelmed. What Bonanno and them found out is the percentage that did end up with PTSD, 9/11 triggered old traumas. 9/11 in and of itself was not it was a contributing factor. What we learned from our vets is the number is still about the same. And yet in the culture today, and I'm seeing this and it's disturbing me. I'm hearing more, oh, my trauma, and it's almost like, oh, my trauma is worse than yours. And I would not.
That's that's their number one identifier.
Yeah, and to me, if you want to be a victim of trauma, it will forever enslave you. But you can choose to be a victim who's been traumatized, who's moving to be a survivor, who's moving to be an overcomer. But culturally, we're seeing a big change as people are coming up, as younger people are coming up. And this is just an observation where everybody got a trophy for just showing up. And now when life hits them, like one of the things we had in the federal workforce, had a lot of people coming out of college coming to work in the federal workforce, and they were wanting, I want a month off, I want to be making this much money and doing that. And their supervisor going, what have you been smoking, dude? I mean, you're going to start off here. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people who are expecting rainbows and unicorns get out in the real world and get kicked in the teeth. And it really throws them off. And I think we as a church and sometimes we as parents and family haven't really done enough of helping them kind of harden up to life. And so I'm seeing a trend right now, which I'm watching pretty closely because I'm seeing more, well, my trauma was this and my trauma was that. And I'm like, it's like my trauma's worse than yours was. My trauma, and that's a very dangerous trend because when you begin to give into that, you give up your own personal power. And,
because the trauma is who you are.
Yeah. Rather than saying, I had to deal with some trauma.
Sure. I feel like if you live long enough, you'll deal with trauma.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think just being born is traumatic,
being born,
right?
I want to go back.
Yeah.
I want to go back. And so post-traumatic stress is typically what happens to the brain after some type of traumatic event. Yesterday you were fine. Today you're picking up your photo album from after the tornado hit you.
Sure, yeah.
And so your brain needs some time to do that. And in the military, as far back as we can go, there have always been, even in the Roman army, in the Egyptian army, there are always rites and things that religions did to help soldiers deal with that trauma. And then in communities, there were things like, remember that death, was it last year that you were officiating? Yep. That was a community grieving event where we came together, We grieved. We shared some good stories.
Mm-hmm.
You came and very boldly proclaimed the love of God in the midst of that and the hope of eternity and the resurrection. And so we had things to do that. And as I watched those kids that night, some of them are going to be just fine because what Bonanno found out, this is great information. When they went back and talked to all the people who'd survived 9/11 and the mirror bombing, they found out some themes. The first one is that there was a community.
Yeah.
And that was a community in their neighborhood or a community of coworkers, and they immediately started getting each other's back. The second thing is they had family and friends, which is a little bit different in community, that were there for them.
Yeah, I had some friends that, some family members that lived in Oklahoma City, and they said for like 2 months, they just went to funerals.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't even know the people.
Right, they just went.
But that was the community. I mean, and every funeral was full.
Yeah. And that was community
Yes.
coming together to clean out that deep wound so it could heal like this.
Yeah.
And in America, well, in every country, we have these rituals we do that do that. And what Bonanno found was those rituals, community, family, and friends, feeling a sense of call to something bigger. And that might be even a vocational sense that
Sure.
I've got to get back to my work. We've got to open that store back up.
People need me to do my job.
Yeah, to do my job. I may be a waiter at Wendy's, an order taker at Wendy's, but they need me.
But they need food. People need food, yeah.
And that's what you see. And even when I've been deployed on some of these disasters, particularly down in Puerto Rico and the Panhandle of Florida, people showed up, because I was there like 5 days post. People were showing up 300 miles away with hot food.
Yeah.
And I just felt compelled to come.
How can I
down
help?
there
Yeah.
With 500 hamburgers.
Yeah.
And so what Bonanno found is those things. And then the other thing was the fact that the community we took this hit, and we as a community are going to push back through it. And then the final part was faith. And he said, we're not going to construct that as a Catholic or Protestant faith. He said, because in New York City, you've got everything.
Yeah.
He said, people who tapped into their personal faith and belief system, however you want to build that house,
Sure.
and their community of faith ended up being a lot more resilient.
Huh. So if a person has dealt with trauma, if you've dealt with trauma, John's saying that you still take those steps, right? You still have a mess to pick up.
Yeah, you've got a mess to pick up, but lean into it.
But lean into it and lean into those structures that he's talking about. Your friends, your family, your community of faith, those type of things, and you will eventually.
Yeah.
You won't be defined by that trauma, but you will say, "I am who I am," and I
Yeah.
dealt with that trauma.
You'll have the scar tissue.
Sure.
You can talk about it. And I loved just a few weeks ago, our pastor did a sermon about Joseph. And that dude had a lot of trauma.
He did.
And when you really get into it, one of the things about being a therapist is, we were talking the other night about Greek and Hebrew and how it kept us up late at night and gave us headaches. But several years ago, I began believing the scripture behaviorally. I'm a therapist. And I want to say, okay, who was doing what, where? And it's interesting when you read the story of Joseph, you got to get a sense of, he's really going, do I disclose? Do I really want to check these guys out? Do I really want to make them pay? And you rarely hear that from the pulpit. When you get into the text, you're like, man, he was really kind of torn here.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll plant this evidence and call him out for thievery.
Yeah.
And yet, as you go through the story, what you meant for evil, God used for good. And so I'm not saying trauma's like, oh, well, but I am saying lean into it, call it what it is. Oddly enough, only about 20% of people ever go for professional help.
20%.
20 to 30%.
Wow.
And part of that is a lot of people they're able to kind of get through it. Okay. Others that pretend that
just need it. They're not going.
Yeah, they're knuckleheaded. They need to do it.
Yeah. So one of the things I have seen, right, because of this is, you had these structures, and some of these people, some people, they had these structures and they weren't healthy.
Right.
And COVID gave them a great excuse.
It sure did. Killed them right off.
Right. It's like, oh, I don't have to go to that thing. I made a commitment. I mean, ugh, we're not going to go. But so some of those folks are looking at that going, man, I'm enjoying not being in that unhealthy thing, right? Yeah. That unhealthy relationship, that unhealthy structure, that unhealthy place.
Right.
How do you re-engage and make sure that a thing is healthy?
Great question, Aaron. Great question. First thing you do is go, okay, why was I involved in that in the first place? What was the payoff? Because we invest our time in stuff we feel that we're getting a payoff of. Why did I initiate that in the first place? What was the benefit of it? And then where did it go wrong? Where did it get off track? Did I get off track? Did they get off track? Did the intent of the group go somewhere else? And then what you do is, we have a thing, I learned it in the military, but we do it in a lot of after-action reports in crisis work and in disaster mental health. And that is, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And what can we do better? And so you turn it into the personal thing. Okay, what was good about this organization, this group? What wasn't so good about it? And what did I glean from it that I needed?
Because it wasn't all bad.
No. And so what's the good stuff I got from it? But then what was the stuff that was a burden that I felt was either unhealthy, unnecessary, or too heavy?
Yeah. Because I feel like that sometimes we, in order to get back to a structure, you kind of get desperate. So you do something that is not so wise or not, and you go right back into the same kind of unhealthy structure, an unhealthy relationship, an unhealthy system, an unhealthy group.
Because it's weird, but humans are kind of comfortable with what's familiar, even if it's really messed up.
Yeah, sometimes it's better, the devil is better than the devil you don't.
Right, yeah, and that's really, I had a guy one time said, why do these people keep getting in crazy relationships? I said, because they thrive on it. And they went, that can't be so. I said, ask them.
Yeah.
At least the craziness of the relationship is kind of predictable.
Yeah.
That's a little twisted.
They know it's going to be exciting for a while.
For a while.
Yeah. Oh, man. Okay, so is it time? So, it's April 1st and coming out of COVID, is it time to start taking some baby steps and try some new systems?
Yes. I think even in your neighborhood, this past couple of weeks, we've seen more people out in our neighborhood, and we've engaged them, and they've engaged back. And that's been a good thing. I think, grocery store and stuff like that. Look at the circles you're in, and look at where you feel like you can safely expand. And expand doesn't mean I'm going to go shopping in the South Valley. Now, maybe I'm going to try the Smiths over here, or the Albertsons over here, and really, or maybe I'm going to go back to church. Easter weekend, I could probably do a low orbit and kind of swing through.
Yeah.
And I do think, particularly for those of us in the family of faith, getting back to some type of physical connectivity to your church.
Even if it's like, so small group, larger group. So,
or even a ministry group, a volunteer group, any way to kind of reconnect.
That's people that are, doing something to serve in some way.
And the church has really stepped up this past year, really, really leaning into helping people. And even with the current crisis we've got south of us, we're going to see churches that are going to say, you know what, these people are in desperate ways. We may or may not agree with policies, but we're going to take care of people.
Absolutely.
And I know, like right now up at Glorietta, they're getting geared up to possibly receive some folks. And some of my friends in ministry are going, hey.
Yeah, they were supposed to have a meeting today, and it didn't happen. And so,
and it's New Mexico, and it's COVID, and it's crazy.
Yeah, so.
But I would find any way you can reconnect. And in your work groups, as some places begin to open up to work again, try to, if you're a leader or a supervisor or manager, try to find some ways to kind of make that reentry a little bit easier. I know one office group that their first 2 days of work, it was kind of a welcome back party. It didn't hardly got any work done. It's just, hey, good to have you back.
Yeah.
Tell us what you've been up to.
Well, and making sure that, people kind of, like I said, give them that baby step that they know that they're going to show up and everything's not just going to fall apart.
Right. And that you're glad to see them.
Yeah. Well, so if somebody needs, that 20 to 30% that says, man, I have this trauma, I have this anxiety, I'm stuck, and they want to get a hold of you.
Sure, love to see you. I'm a therapist. Now, I don't do traditional therapy anymore. I do more of a work, life consulting, counseling type stuff. I don't do long-term therapy. We're not going to be sitting there picking it out of your navel or anything like that. I'm a behavioral therapist. I use a cognitive behavioral model that we freely integrate Scripture into it. If they want to call me, you can call my landline, my telephone.
And we're going to have all that.
Okay, great. You can reach out and call me. On that slide, though, if they would like maybe a help in kind of managing their thought life, they can just text the word brain tricks to 33777. And there'll be like a 13-minute video I did on how to manage your thought life.
Really? 33777. Brain.
Right.
Text the word brain tricks.
Right. And then if you're...
Standarding message rates do apply.
That's right. That's right. And then another little ebook I did this year that did really well on Amazon, we just had it up for sale for a short time, is if your marriage is in some stress, you can text the word 21 ways to 33777, and you'll get my ebook that gives you 21 tips on how to improve
Is that
your relationship.
21 ways?
21 ways, yes, 21 ways.
Okay.
To 33777. There are no operators standing by.
Yeah. So, well, that's great. And then your website's on there. They can reach you. Do you have resources on your website as well?
Yes, I have one website that's just informational, johnthurman.info. But all my blogs are posted on johnthurman.net. And there's some good articles on there on resilience, resilient marriages, how to deal with trauma, how to be a leader in the midst of the COVID stuff. A lot of just general stuff on there that you can just type in Google John Thurman articles on resilience, and you'll find some pretty good stuff there.
That's awesome. Well, I think it's time. It's been a year, and I think we're, it's not normal. I mean, what's normal anyways, right?
Right. It's going to be a new normal.
It's a new normal, and it's a new way, but it's a new year, and I think it's time for people to start reattaching to structures and finding structures that work for them, that help them move on as a person.
And the biggest challenge they'll face, I think, is taking baby steps out of that new comfort zone of isolation back into reintegrating into those social structures that help bring significance and training and purpose in your life.
Well, that's great. John, anything else you had to say to the folks out there?
Man, thank you so much for the opportunity to come on. And folks, praying for you. Be strong. Lean into it because you've got what you need. Matter of fact, there's an old phrase that says there is more in you than you know. And when I was a kid, I got to go through the North Carolina Outward Bound School. And I was 15. I was a punk. What do I know? But one of the things I remember from that was their motto was to serve, to strive, and not to yield. And I believe as Christians, we have the Holy Spirit in us. We have that courage that He gives us, that no matter what comes our way, we've got what we need to deal with it, with His presence in our life.
That's awesome. Well, John, I can't thank you enough.
Thanks.
And hope to see you guys around. Love you guys.
Thank you.